We'll start right here, and we'll go from there.
Also known as Pirate Software Online. I've been in the gaming industry for about 20 years. I used to work at Blizzard Entertainment, then Amazon Games.
So if he is 38 and he's been in the gaming industry for 20 years, that means he's been in the gaming industry since he was 18, if I understand that correctly. I think that's his age. I think I saw it in one of the shorts, but maybe I'm wrong.
Studios, and now I own my own studio, Pirate Software, by the same name, which is an indie studio, and I've been here for about 8 years now. I also run a massive community. We've got about 180,000 people in Discord, and most of what I do is try to teach other people how to make games, teach them that they can make games, show them the tools to do so, and try to do everything without any paywalls or bullshit.
His dad got him a job at Blizzard right out of high school, so I am aware of that. I know his dad was a big deal when it came to Blizzard. Based on the shorts I've seen, I've not seen his long form content. I've seen a lot of Pirate Software shorts where he talks about how his dad was the guy they based the South Park character off of. So I'm aware that if he got a job at 18 at Blizzard, it's likely through some level of nepotism. But to me, that is invalid, because if I'm looking at it from this perspective of a project manager, of a systems engineer, of someone who has gone into working fields, I've seen people who have been super successful. They bring their son into the business or their daughter into the business, and their child actually does a better job outperforming their parent purely because they've got the same line of thinking. A good example of this is if I go work for, and I've done this before, if I go work for project management systems for any hospital or pharmaceutical company or anything that's related to medical tech, I immediately have an advantage because both of my parents, even if they're not involved whatsoever, have been medical parents involved in the medical industry. And so I've gone into those jobs with information that other people would otherwise not have, and done a way better job than anyone else could, just because I have a level of information that other people just don't have via experience. So whether he's good or not at his job is irrelevant to whether he got his job because of nepotism. It's not fair. It's not right. There might be people who go out of their way to be way better than him that they didn't hire, and that is a problem from a legal standpoint. Understand that, right? If you look at nepotism from a legal standpoint, you're not allowed to do that. It shouldn't be a thing, but it happens all the time. Right? If you look at any community, if you look at the Black community in America, if you look at the Jewish community in America, if you look at any community, they always hire with an in-group preference. It is impossible to get away from that, right? There is one situation where there's no in-group preference, and generally speaking, that is when the people hiring someone, this is an actual charted data set that's proven to be true over time. If you have an attractive woman who is competent at a job and applies for a job, and that woman is being interviewed by a panel of 3 people, and it turns out that 2 of those women are less attractive women, or they perceive themselves as less attractive than the woman that they are hired, they are attempting to hire or potentially hiring, they will almost immediately reject her. Right? That is the one data set that I've seen that occurs of an out-group preference where people don't want to hire people of the same kind of inclination. That's what I've noticed being a project manager for half a decade, right? Going into different companies and helping them fix their issues. So nepotism or not, that's a legal standpoint issue, not a performance standpoint issue. So keep that in mind. I don't care that his dad got him the job or not, because that's going to happen regardless. Doesn't matter where you go, that's always going to happen. People with parents or family members in an industry always have an advantage over you, some random person that they know nothing about.
Shit in the way. It's incredibly important to me that we keep making games and that the next generation has the tools to do so, so that our medium doesn't die out. And it never will. And that's the whole intention of all of this. So with that in mind, that community brought me this and tried to get me to sign it. And I don't want to. Number one, I can't because I don't live in Europe. But number two, I wouldn't sign it even if I could. Okay. I kind of go through this and try to explain the reasoning as to why that would be the case. So from my perspective, what I understand of Stop Killing Games is they are attempting to prevent people from taking games offline forever that you never see again, that you never see any component of again, because they are able to hoard what the code is, hoard what the game is,
even though people have paid for it, take it offline and no one ever sees it again. Case in point would be Amazon's game that people played, bought, and then they unreleased the game, as in removed it entirely. Nintendo does this a lot. Sony does this a lot. It becomes incredibly difficult to... Yes, The Crew 2, there you go. It becomes incredibly difficult to preserve games, and the only way that tends to do that is with old school games that have a physical copy that someone has in their hand that they can crack, that they can upload, that they can get through some level of pirating. But as far as I'm aware, disallowing companies from taking away something you've bought and you own is no different to me than if you bought a physical object. You bought, I don't know, a car, and one day Ford comes along and says, no, we want our car back. Even though you paid for it, it's not yours, right? That is the baseline caveman retardation understanding I have of this so far. So I'm interested to see why he thinks this is a bad idea.
All of the internet hate machine that's grown up around it. So let's go into how this works and why this is an issue to me. First things first, what is an initiative? So an initiative is actually not law. It is something that you put...
Hold on. When you buy a digital copy of a game, the TOS states you are buying a limited license to play the game. Okay, so that's fine there, but guess what? You can sign a contract saying that Apple can come to your house and legally fuck your ass, but if they try and legally fuck your ass, then it's against CPA. It's against Customer Protection Acts, which means that that contract is invalid. Now, if you've got something that is egregiously against the customer in a solid enough way, right, then they can't do that. This would be like buying a product outright that you buy, you pay money for, and you are not renting. It is not in a rented state. Now, this is a gray area because this is digital stuff. And guess what? Everyone in the legal space, everyone in the power to change the rules or make them adapt to the digital space, right? They are 95 fucking years old, injecting baby blood into their forehead to try and stay alive. So the last thing they understand about digital things is they can't connect to a fucking Skype call, and they need to get their great grandchild to do it for them so that everyone can see nothing but their nose on the video call. Right? Which means that these regulators are too old to understand what's going on. So the law does need an update. The law does need to change and adapt with the digital times. Right? So it is old, but it's the current system. So games can currently get away with that, and that's fine, but it may be against heavy amounts of Consumer Protection Acts that contradict what the law currently says about it. Did you not hear about the guy who's suing Disney right now because his wife died to an allergic reaction, but because he signed up for Disney Plus, he can't? Yes, I've heard about that, and guess what? Disney's going to lose that stupid shit. Right? Any reasonable judge will apply the law in its context, look at that situation and be like, Disney, you cannot do this, you stupid fucks. So unless that judge is corrupt, that is an easy ruling, unless there's something else there that we don't know about, that's in discovery currently, that no one else knows about, very specifically for the legal case that hasn't been told, right? So, it doesn't matter that they're suing. They're trying to get out of it. Disney thinks they can drag someone through the court, assuming that all that information you said is correct. They're trying to drag it out so that they can go into a settlement as opposed to admitting wrongdoing, because they know they have an infinite amount of money, and some guy, there's some random guy whose wife died just doesn't have that money, right? So let's go off of some logic here as opposed to the written rules and regulations of the law, because those are very regularly broken. And as we generally have found out in the late stage capitalism system that we work with, rules and regulations only apply to people who don't have an infinite stack of money to pay for things. So let's try and look at this from a more logical standpoint as opposed to the letter of the law and how people are going to get around it.
Together, so you can put it up in front of representatives and they can start the conversation. The reason why I have a problem with Stop Killing Games is specifically it starts the wrong conversation. If we're trying to kill off the practice of developers putting together a live service game, pitching it as a single player experience, and then taking away support in the future, this ain't it. And the reason why is...
Okay, so he specifically mentions the single player experience. EULA means shit generally, but not to a lot of people. Have money to spare to go to court for $60 a game. Yeah, okay. So, like I said, the legalese around this is always going to be confusing, and it's always going to change, right? So what he specifically spoke about there was single-player games and how this is the wrong way to go about it for single-player games. I want you to keep that in mind, because live service games are a completely different issue.
Specifically on this initiative, under its own description, it says, this initiative calls to require publishers that sell or license video games to consumers in the European Union or related features and assets sold for video games they operate to leave said video games in a functional playable state. Specifically,
I see nothing egregious about that. Video games should always be in a playable state if you've purchased it. The key word here is sell. If you have sold a product, that means you have given over ownership of some kind of copy of it to someone else. It is not rent, right? Licensing is a different issue entirely.
The initiative seeks to prevent the remote disabling of video games by the publishers before providing reasonable means to continue functioning of said video games without the involvement from the side of the publisher. This isn't always possible in all video games, and it doesn't call out the specific practice that this is supposedly trying to defeat. It is incredibly vague and will damage all live service games. How would you...
Okay, how is it vague?
Keep League of Legends in a functional playable state?
League of Legends is not a single-player game, so why did he allude to single-player games and was targeting single-player games and then immediately talk about a multiplayer game? That's the first contradiction that I'm seeing right here, right? League of Legends is a completely different game. Not only that, but what this sounds like, right, is this is a preventative measure for sale of a video game. League of Legends is not a game that you sell. League of Legends is a game that is free to play that you sell things within. So I don't see how League of Legends is applicable to this situation specifically. As for live service games that are online that you've purchased some various copy of, you would need more context. I would need more context when it comes to this. Also, thanks for the sub, Cup. I appreciate it. I'm not saying your full name, you bastard. You know you come in here with that name and you know what you're doing. Imagine me selling you a car, the papers you sign, say in big letters, papers you sign to buy car, and then I take it from you the next day because I was only selling you a license for it, and I can take whenever you want. You see, if you own the license, you should own the product, right? There should be no legal distinction there, but I know that there is in some cases, for very contextual ones. Right, so that should be an invalid argument from a logical perspective, but a legal perspective, that's when things get iffy.
You'd have to re-architect the entire game. The game is what is called client-server.
Yes, so, but you don't... Okay, so all of this to me is invalid because you don't buy League of Legends. It's free to play.
Client-server models. There's a server and there's a client, and all of the math, all of the game, everything happens on the server. The client just displays it. And the reason we want to do it that way is so that you can't teleport around and do a billion damage. You don't trust the client. You trust the server. The client just displays what it's told, right? So if we wanted to re-architect this, we'd have to take all of that server logic, push it back out into the client, and somehow make that playable in a multiplayer-only video game. That doesn't make sense to me.
Okay, so we were targeting single-player games, so still, again, why are we talking about multiplayer games now? That he said very specifically in the beginning, single-player games, so why are we targeting multiplayer games? I don't understand the difference there. I don't understand why he jumped from one to the other. I'm missing something here.
To me. So this isn't going to work for all games. Why is it calling out all games? And it's really easy to...
Yeah, okay, so a driver's license does not give you ownership of any car that you use. That's fair, Corbett, but a driver's license is not the license to the car. A car has a separate licensing agreement as opposed to a driver's license. You own your driver's license, right? Even though you've bought a license. So if you have a card that depicts your license, that license is actually a property, not a physical object. The physical object is just a representation of the thing you've bought. So if you've gone and you've done your driver's license test, you passed the test, you paid your fees, you've got a driver's license. And if you lose that card, you can go reapply for another one. You are getting the physical representation. You haven't lost your driver's license as an idea. You've lost the physical object that represents it, right? So you own your driver's license, even though it is a license, right? So there's a separation there that's happening. If you had a license that said you have bought this licensed car and you've bought the license and the car, that means you should still own the car. Software license gives you a limited privilege to use the software that they own. Yes, and that's the distinction I want to make here, right? Is logically speaking, there should be no distinction between the software license and the product itself. From a logical perspective, not a legal perspective, a logical perspective. If I have signed a license, if I've bought a license, right, for a game, I should be able to own that game as a physical object. Now, this is very different. Keep in mind, this is very different from buying a licensing agreement from a music creator and putting that music in your game. They still own the music, they still earn royalties off of that music, but you are then allowed to use that music. That's a very different case, right? And that's a more commercial space because you got two commercial entities interacting as opposed to a private entity interacting with a commercial fucking entity.
Say like, oh, you know, that'll get worked out down the line.
Fuck you, Ilgi.
We're dealing with government here. If we're going to be putting up these types of ideas, specifically in front of government, we need to be calling out the right issues, especially if you don't have precedent set. Because now you're going to be setting precedent on something that doesn't make any sense with people that may not understand the nuance of our industry, all in the name of saving games. I can't agree.
So he might be right about this because, like I said in the beginning, right? The problem with the regulations isn't the regulations or the attempt to make things better. The problem is you've got a bunch of fucking boomers who are so ancient they have no context or understanding of the digital space or how anything works. These are not gamers making these rules. The last game these people played was fucking Scrimmage after they got off the Ark. And the problem is the age problem there, not the legal perspective itself. So some stupid ass boomer who's 2 million years old who saw Jesus die on the cross is trying to understand the digital space. And that might be a problem. That's a genuine concern to have. But from the legal standpoint of the sale of a game, a sale, that's a different issue.
Agree with that. So let's go into why this is happening, right? So why did this start in the first place? What is the specific cases they've called out that are egregious? And they have one. It's The Crew. So action on The Crew. The video game The Crew, published by Ubisoft, was recently destroyed for all players and had a player base of at least 12 million people. Due to the game's size and France's strong consumer protection laws, this represents one of the best opportunities to hold a publisher accountable for this action. If we're successful in charges being pressed against Ubisoft, this can have a ripple effect on the video games industry to prevent publishers from destroying more games. First off, I don't like the idea.
Okay, so I do take issue with that, right? I do take issue with charges being pressed against Ubisoft. I think the only charge that should be pressed here is that the game should be able to be taken when they take it offline. Someone else should be allowed to have access to that game, build their own private server, and run it privately. And then Ubisoft themselves have surrendered any form of legal recourse as to the people running a private server. That's what should occur. That seems fair and logical to me, right? So if The Crew goes offline and no one can play it from the original publisher, if someone else out there throws up a private server, goes into the back end of the game, figures out how to connect it to their private server, and then gives everyone access to that game, there should be no legal recourse for Ubisoft to go out of their way and sue the guy who did that, right? It should be considered, number one, transformative in nature, because he has altered the very function of the servers that are going into the game, even if it's on the back end. Number two, the original producer of the game is no longer producing the game, right? This would be like if there was one person selling soap and he stopped selling soap, and then some other guy decides to sell soap, and they're like, fuck you, everyone must be stinky, we're suing you for stealing our IP of soap, right? Obviously, I'm being ridiculous about this, and that's like a wild, crazy kind of thing, but I'm trying to make make sense as much as possible, because a video game is an idea and an abstract concept as opposed to something physical that we hold in our hands all the time. They used to be something physical that we hold in our hands all the time. All that should happen here is no persecution for Ubisoft, right? There should be no charges pressed against Ubisoft, but they should lose any form of legal recourse for coming after someone who runs a private server. And I think a law like that wouldn't affect Ubisoft so much as it would affect someone like Nintendo, who needs to be put in their fucking place sometimes, right? That is the issue there. You are understanding Thor's stance pretty well without him fully explaining. Okay, so I'm trying to explain this as much as possible from what I see from a logical standpoint, right? It's definitely more complicated than that. Chaos Lab is right. There's way more complexities to this, but I'm trying to break it down to a base principle of what should happen versus reality. Guess what? In reality, right, we shouldn't have slavery, but guess what? It fucking exists. Right? The reality and the complexities of reality are not the same as the ideal case. I can only talk about the ideal case because I am not a lawyer and I'm taking this from an independent, idealistic, theoretical case standpoint, right? And I'm giving you my opinion, right? You could strip the IP from the company by bankrupting it, then still the IP as it goes free as the company doesn't exist. So steal the IP. So, okay, here's the question, Chaos Lab. How do you bankrupt a company with an IP that they are no longer selling? How do you steal an IP from someone who's no longer selling the thing at all? This is what corporate raiders do. The mechanism is... Okay, I want to see what you have to say, because this is going to be important. How do I pop out someone in chat? Right? I think this is probably, he's probably going to say something important here. So, sorry. I don't know if you're a woman or a man. That's my bad. Or something in between. Yeah, you be whatever you be. Okay? I want to understand this. Fucking Twitch. Fuck. Come on. God damn it. Fucking. Okay, the mechanism is she, her, thanks. Okay, there you go. Okay, she. Pop out doesn't look. Fuck. Okay. Okay, so that was worthless. No, don't! Okay, I thought I just lost my chat. Thank God. Okay. I need to understand what this mechanism is that you're talking about specifically. For when Prime Timothy can talk about all of this. It's very interesting. Okay, so maybe I'll look at Timothy Kane and Prime after this, right? Maybe they can make it make sense then. How do I pop my chat back in? Okay, there we go. So I can only give my opinion. I want you to understand this. I can only give my opinion on this, right? I can't give you some legal standpoint because I'm not a fucking lawyer. I'm not a professional in European legal issues around the Digital Copyright Acts and how this behaves and who's allowed to do what. I'm only giving an idealistic case. I need you to understand that. Right? So if you disagree with me, it's probably because you know something more that I don't.
This can have a ripple effect on the video games industry to prevent publishers from destroying more games. First off, I don't like the idea in this that
Hold on. It can be used as a play. I'm not explaining it well.
I dropped all the interesting digging me. And Lord Black dig recently in DMs. Have fun. And you can decide if it's worth bringing up.
What? I dropped all the interesting digging me and Lord Black did recently in DMs. Have fun. You can decide if it's worth bringing up. Okay, I'll be deciding that later, Super God. Right? I understand. I wanted to do this anyway. Right? I wanted to look into this anyway. So all of this is good for me because I need to learn all of the stuff if I need to know what's going on. But thank you very much for putting it there. I will look at it. But if you showed people's DMs to me, I'm not going to be showing that on stream. I want you to understand that.
It has a player base of 12 million people.
Okay.
That is not how long-running games work. There is a large number of people that buy the game, and that player base slowly dwindles off until nobody is playing it anymore.
He's not
If there's
wrong.
any costs associated with keeping the game online, which this was an online video game, then eventually it costs more to keep it online than it does to keep running it, right? So the cost outweighs the amount of income for it. There are bad business practices that can occur in there. There are companies that will sell.
Okay, Chaos Lab, I need you to explain to me what you mean by the IP getting raided, right? I think if this sucks to say, right? But if a game is still up and online and owned by its owner, and they've got working servers, working functional servers, no one should be surprised, I should say, that a private server is going to get fucked in the ass by the original company. But if they have, in its entirety, taken it offline, ripped it to shit, taken it offline, no one can pick up the original, the OG, from the person who produced it initially, then at the same time, they should be able to get that product somewhere else, in the form of a private server or someone else. Derivative works, etc. So there's derivative works of everything. That's the problem. Dota, Heroes of the Storm, League of Legends, you could say they're all derivative works. By that standard, you would be able to... the lawsuit that Blizzard launched against the guy who used a custom map, made Dota, that Steam got a hold of, that guy should have won by that standard. Company doesn't own the IP if it doesn't exist. Who then owns the IP under the law? As a company, you could adopt the IP of the game and make money. The dead company isn't going to profit. Yeah, you should be able to, it should almost go into, what's the word for it? It should go into like free use if they've dropped the IP entirely. I mean, directives, characters, art, nothing stopping it from being ripped. Okay, so... Okay, fair point. I think I understand what you're going with here. You're saying that an IP has come offline. Maybe there's a character with a well-shaped ass that everyone wants to see in another game. They steal that artwork from the game itself and then place it within a new game. Right? I'm assuming that's what you mean. To me, that sounds like a royalty issue, right? So if someone is stealing the art, the functional components, making a brand new game, and it's the same identical thing, that would then be a royalty issue no different from music, in my opinion. If it is a game that is fully gone offline, and they are taking the game and replicating it as a service that people can use, that the initial guide doesn't sell anymore, they should be able to do that, but without alteration that would make it a completely different game. Maybe there should be some kind of royalty system from that. Maybe people should be able to rent the royalty off of it or pay some level of percentage, but that's again an argument. Right? I mean, that's again an argument that's very complex and very hard to get into. I'm trying to look at this as, I have product A. I sell product A. I stop selling product A. No one can get a hold of product A. Some guy who's enterprising enough, who comes along, sets up all the back end by himself of product A, gets a hold of product A, and alters it in a transformative way to give people product A. They should be able to do that. Now, the problem there comes in when it comes to money, right? Not the game itself, but money, right? Either there needs to be a legal stipulation that the guy who's taken product A and replicated it and now gives it to people to play cannot make a profit off of it. Or, barring that being impossible because, you've got to pay for server space and so on and so forth, there should be some level of royalty interaction that happens from the original IP owner and the new person who's doing it.
a online-only
Let's
game
continue.
as a single-player experience and kind of just put it into the TOS and hide it. But not all companies do that. When they do, we should be calling out that specific company, not all companies. So let's take a look at this and find out more about the Crew itself. And if we pull up their Wikipedia, we can see that the Crew was actually created in 2014, which, much to the hatred of all of us oldies on the internet, was 10 years ago. Oh.
Jesus Christ.
So this was an online-only racing video game developed by Ubisoft Ivory Tower and Ubisoft Reflections and published by Ubisoft. So all Ubisoft, right? With that in mind, it said it was a scaled-down recreation of the contiguous United States and included both role-playing and large-scale multiplayer elements. So it had a massive multiplayer component to it. It is an online-only service-based game, and they shut it down 10 years later. On March 31st, 2024, Ubisoft shut down the game's servers, rendering the game unplayable, which is normal for live service games. The only thing that I can see in here that could be a problem is if they post it as not an online-only experience. But everything that I found online shows that the game was always marketed as online only. If you're going...
Is that true? Does anyone know if there's an offline experience? Right? Does anyone know if the Crew had an offline experience? The only racing game I ever played was Need for Speed, so I wouldn't know. Okay, so it was forced online. So it could have been offline, is what you're telling me, Zé. You're telling me if you remove the online element from the Crew, it could have been an offline game. So there is a single player mode. So it's a forced online experience that they did in a manipulative way. This is like when Xbox came out with that idea where they were like, you need to scan your ball sack in front of the webcam for this game to work. Right? That's what it sounds like to me. I think that again is a legalese issue, and forced online play should be something that is looked at and regulated. Right? That's something that needs to be very heavily regulated, and if a game has a single player mode, that should not be forced online. There's 5% we can keep in the Crew too. It was offline save for being online for anti-piracy or other checks. Right, so what you're telling me is it was an offline game that had an online tether as opposed to a necessity of online game. So what Thor seems to think of this game is as the same as League of Legends, where it has to be online because you require other people. Right, so he might have a misunderstanding of what the Crew itself is. The Crew sounds like the people who made Stop Killing Games targeted this game specifically, understanding that it was forced online, but should have been offline. Which, yes, Diablo 3. There you go. Diablo 3 is a good example. So, it sounds like this game, you could remove the online tether and you could still play the game. That's what it sounds like to me. It doesn't require a server to function. Maybe he mentions it. Also, that link you sent, I've got it open. We'll look at that. Whoa, Jesus, that's a 40-minute video. I might do that next stream. We'll see. I'm just trying to understand my Discord drama here.
Going to be buying an online-only game, that means it can only run when it's online. And if the servers need to shut down in the future, far in the future, it makes sense to me for the access to that game to be cut, if it's online only. If it's a single-player experience that has online-only functionality specifically just to shut down the game in the future, and the online-only doesn't actually add any gameplay functionality, I'd agree with you. That's a shitty business practice. But that's really rare. And in the specific cases where it does...
Is he saying that's really rare from the perspective of someone who, is he saying that's really rare from the perspective of volume of games or volume of players? Because if he's saying that's rare from the perspective of volume of players, then I point you to Diablo 3. Right, so I already know that Thor's compromised. I wanted to say this at the end of the video, but I might as well say it now, right? Thor is compromised because he's working as a game developer. Right, but this also means that he is knowledgeable from the perspective of a game developer, and he will know nuances that I don't. Right, So he's got more knowledge, but he's also compromised. If what you're saying, Jimmy, is 100% true, and I'm going to work off the assumption that what you're saying is 100% true. I don't know if it is. I've done no research into the background of this. That just makes him more compromised, but that might not make him wrong. Might not, right? I don't know if he is or isn't. But either way, we all know he's making a game called Heartbound. As far as I'm aware, that's a single-player experience, and as you can imagine, he doesn't want to be in the situation where if you've got a single-player game, it gets taken away from you because some fucking boomer in a regulation office doesn't understand the difference between going online and buying a single-player game that you can play offline and going online and playing a game that's online only. Right? So I understand that he's going to lean towards the dev instead of the player, and that's perfectly fine, but he might know something else here that I don't.
Does happen, we should call out that, not just all games and not all live service games. Further, there's more context to this too. The Crew itself came out in 2014, but it actually had a sequel that came out in 2018, and then it had another sequel that came out in 2023. And if we go to the Crew's SteamDB, which again is not going to be all of the player base for this. It's only going to show the ones who were playing it through Steam. It was on multiple platforms. We look at the max here. It did start out with a sizable amount of community, and then it degraded. And it had a major drop-off in 2018, which is the same...
Wow, the game's still doing better than New World.
same year that it launched a sequel. This is normal. When a sequel comes out, a lot of the player base, if the sequel doesn't suck, will move over to it. And then the servers effectively die. You can't run a live service game on this few players.
You can't.
You can't.
Ask New World, you can't.
Most of the time, especially not if there's anything else that goes into it. And if we go into that...
Okay, so here's the complexity of this. If this is a single-player game that's tethered online, you can run the game without the server, which means it's an unnecessary thing and should be a single-time purchase.
Anything else, and we could see that there was license problems. So on December 14th, 2023, Ubisoft delisted The Crew and its expansions from digital platforms, suspended sales of microtransactions, and announced that the game's servers would shut down on March 31st. So they gave them 3 months. Usually I would say, hey, 6 months is probably a better deal, but if they're going to do 3 months, they're going to do 3 months. The only thing that I'd be interested outside of that is if there was a contractual obligation to do more than 3 months and they didn't follow it, if it was in the terms of service or not. Citing upcoming server infrastructure and licensing constraints. What were those licensing constraints? Well, it turns out that all of the cars in the game were licensed from the car companies. And a 10-year running game likely means that they had...
Aha, there you go. Okay, now I understand it. Okay, I think this is fucking stupid as all hell, right? I think this is dumb as pig shit. But this is because all the laws and copyright stuff around this were written way back when the universe just experienced the Big Bang. There were 4 lawyers who got around a table and started writing these fucking laws, right? That, I understand now, is because the cars, the image of the cars, are licensed to the company. The company has an agreement with those cars, right? Those car brands, and they have to pay some of money. Now, if they're lucky, they got away with a lump sum. If they didn't get lucky, that means they've got a continual cost that comes with that licensing. All right. Now, there's an issue that I can see, right? Because car brands are pieces of shit, and they will sue the fuck out of anyone who even comes near them. For some context, there was a guy who decided to make who was it? It was Deadmau5, I think. Deadmau5 made a Ferrari, changed the paint job, called it the Ferrari, and then got sued by Ferrari for alteration of their IP, not their car itself, right? So then he traded in his Ferrari, said fuck Ferrari, and made a Lamborghini. And Lamborghini was nice enough that they went out of their way to be like, we think that's cool, let's promote this, we think that's fucking awesome, right? Which was the right way to go about your marketing, which is more valuable than the legalese on the back end. The fact that they own that IP separate from the car is where this is coming in. Yeah, he called it the Nyanbogini. That's what he did. So this is where the issue lies. It's not actually the game itself, it's the licensing strapped to the game. Okay.
Licensed to them for 10 years, and that means that it would likely reopen for negotiation. Now, understand that's speculation, but I've seen this type of a deal many times in the industry while I've been working in it. So it's not unlikely. If you're going to have to renegotiate on a game that has so few players and is not turning a profit anymore, you're probably just going to forego the renegotiation.
Yeah,
and if those servers are aging, you're not going to want to recreate that infrastructure. And there are some people that'll say, well, just make it all single player. Well, I've explained that that doesn't make any sense in the first place. If you're making it all single player, you'd have to carve off all of that, and it's developer time and money. When you already have sequels out and the game has basically no players left anyway, it makes more sense to just move on. I
need to hear that again because there's something that feels off about that. I need to hear that again.
You're not going to want to recreate industry in licensing constraints. Well, it turns out that all of the cars in the game were licensed from the car companies. And a 10-year running game likely means that they had license to them for 10 years. And that means that it would likely reopen for negotiation. Now, understand that's speculation, but I've seen this type of a deal many times in the industry while I've been working in it. So it's not unlikely. If you're going to have to renegotiate on a game that has so few players and is not turning a profit anymore, you're probably just going to forego the renegotiation. And if those servers are aging, you're not going to want to recreate that infrastructure. And there are some people that'll say, well, just make it all single player. Well, I've explained that that doesn't make any sense in the first place. If you're making it all single player, you'd have to carve off all of that, and it's developer time and money.
Okay, just make it single player. Okay, so that doesn't make sense to me, right? This is why I say there should be some level of surrendered IP. They no longer provide the product. They no longer are going to work on the IP at all, which means the onus of carving all of the stuff off that is the multiplayer element or resetting it up with new servers should fall to who's ever setting up a private server or whoever is trying to bring this game back or revive it, right? It is not the responsibility of the developer of the initial IP to recarve that game into something else. And that's a nuance of the regulations that four retarded lawyers who are older than time are not going to understand, right? Because they don't play video games, they're too busy fucking each other's wives in the bathroom. So the issue is the regulators themselves here, whereas if you've got a surrendered IP, all this should say, this Stop Killing Games, all this should actually say is Ubisoft forfeits any right to sue or go after some fucking guy in his basement who resets up the game. It shouldn't say they have to preserve the game. The onus of preservation should be on whoever decides to pick up the game and redevelop it into something else someone else wants to play. That sounds more reasonable to me than saying, hey, now that you fucked up this game and are shutting it down, you now need to redevelop this game into something that someone else has to play. It should be just a forfeit of IP responsibility and execution. That's what should come with that, right? The onus of preservation should not be on these people who've decided to shut down the game because it's non-profitable, because now they're forced in a regulatory sense to lose even more money that they otherwise never would have. Just wait to see where it goes. The amount of legalese and law would lead to is just a haystack that's turning into mushroom. All law is legalese. Have you ever seen a contract? Right? Have you ever seen a contract between an individual? I'm not kidding. I used to work as a project manager and systems engineer. Some of the people I have had to sign contracts with, I have got a stack of documents that is fucking 65 pages long for 1 week of work. And I had to sign every single page and read it. And guess what? I have to keep that fucking stack in my garage until I'm a 95-year-old man, because that's when the NDA runs out. That is all legalese. It's all like that. It's always going to be like that, and it needs to get into specificity. And the best way I can think to talk about this is I used to know a guy in university who was studying to be a lawyer, and the words he said to me is that when you are writing up a contract, you have got to think about it like you are trying to make a wish You are trying to not get fucked over as hard as possible by a genie that you just summoned out of a lamp that is going to do everything in the world to monkey paw wish the shit out of you. So you need to be so hyper specific that the most basic request becomes 100 pages long. That's all legalese. But now I'm going on a tangent.
You already have sequels out and the game has basically no players left anyway, it makes more sense to just move on. I don't find that to be a problem from the developer perspective, and I understand that people find that to be a problem from the player perspective. These are two different ideologies, and that's okay to have two different ideologies. I just won't agree with it because I understand the burden that puts if we raise that problem in the way that we are right now. If you try to tell me that every studio needs to run their live service game indefinitely or not want to run one at all, then no one's going to run them. And we're going to miss out on adventures like Final Fantasy XIV. And even though I don't play anymore, League of Legends or any other live service.
People run private servers for Final Fantasy XIV. People run private servers for WoW. They run Ascension, which I think is a fantastic private server that's transformative in nature. People will set up private servers on their own time. You will find one for WildStar, right? You will find them for all of these games. I just don't think the onus on redevelopment needs to lie on the original publisher. It needs to rely on the guy who's going out of his way to rebuild the game and put it online, and the onus to sue should be surrendered by the original company. That's all. I think that's what this law needs to target for the sake of preservation, as opposed to putting all the onus on the developer in the first place.
Service game, any of them. You're talking everything, like even phone games, as funny as that is. A lot of people don't realize that phone games require online-only activity. What about...
Yeah, but phone games aren't real games.
Things like Pokemon Go? What about stuff like Monster Hunter Now?
By the way, Pokemon Go went based because you put in your weight, and then they had an update where, depending on your weight, it made your character fat. That's based as fuck by them.
What about any of them?
It's why I don't play Pokemon Go. It's because I don't want to see a fucking planet-sized Pokemon Pokemon trainer.
We'd never get any of them. And that's why I think this needs to not be vague. It needs to be specific about the business practice it's trying to defeat, which is specifically companies that are doing this under the guise of it being a single-player game, but adding online-only functionality that is not necessary and doesn't add any gameplay elements. That's the problem. So now we're going to go to Roze, otherwise known as Accursed Farms, the creator of this initiative, and one of the ones that's pushing it the most online. I'm going to let him say exactly why he thinks that this will go through very easily and why it is important, and then I'm going to tell you why I don't agree with it.
Comes law in the EU? Yeah, it might be. Now, it's not a guarantee, but I think if we get the signatures, this passes. Why do I say that? Well, it's a few factors. Politicians like easy wins, and this doesn't require them to do much at all. And unless it involves gambling or protecting children, politicians generally don't care about video games.
Did he say gambling or penetrating children, or gambling and protecting children? Because he might have misspoke.
So this isn't of big consequence to them or most of their constituencies.
I'm going to stop it there for a moment. The assertion that politicians just like easy wins, so this legislation will go through, that the politicians don't care about a multi-billion-dollar global industry and that it doesn't matter to their constituencies is incredibly absurd to me. I don't think this is the right direction at all for a movement like this. I think it's...
Okay, I'm going to push back on Thor here. It's obvious they don't give a fuck. Right? It is obvious to me that subhuman politicians don't give a fuck about any of this. They don't give a fuck about big pharma. They don't give a fuck about the pesticides in your food, the poison that you're going through. All they care about is who gave them money just before they voted on a bill. Right? They don't care how much damage they do to you because they care about what's filling their pockets. Politicians have directly shown that multiple times throughout history, throughout anyone in the EU, anyone in the US. My country specifically is viciously bad at this, right? My country is ultra corrupt when it comes to this kind of stuff. I don't think the large majority of this, like politicians care about. They don't give a fuck about multi-billion-dollar industries because they keep on asking the question, what does this do for me? So I disagree with Thor on this point. I think it's very idealistic what he's saying.
Incredibly damaging, and it makes our entire industry look bad, both on the player side and the developer side. If we're going to be putting forward anything that may eventually turn into legislation, it should be passing because it's the right thing to do for consumers and developers, and that there's some kind of a middle ground, not just...
Wrong. False. It needs to be the right thing to do for consumers, because consumers are the ones who have no power to wield any action within a court of law, whereas developers do, right? People who, if you want a good product, you regulate for consumers, not for developers or anyone designing a product, because if you start regulating for people designing a product, you very quickly end up in a situation where people who buy a product get fucked, and the people who made the product that fucked you up are protected under the law, right? There does need to be some level of interaction of what's right and wrong to do when it comes to the people who create things, right? And that needs to be guided in the correct direction. But it's consumers are your primary. It's consumers before anything else, right? Because that is your main constituency. That is your largest population. They are always consumers, not people creating things. If you start regulating for people creating things, you end up in monopolies and duopolies and these weird mafia backline systems. And a good example of this is if anyone goes and starts searching into the mafias of how internet companies are run in the US. That's what regulating for people who create versus the consumer gets you.
Because it's an easy win and politicians don't care. This sets us off on a completely wrong foot.
EU law is already unclear on a lot of this practice anyway.
True.
And that's dangerous. If we're going to be setting precedent, which could change the way that law works all the way down the road, then we need to be sending the right message, which this is sending a vague message that doesn't cover the actual problem. So
okay, so then is Thor saying let's leave it fucked instead of trying to fix it?
This is not a win to me. This is a huge risk.
And we would be making it easy for them to settle it. It falls in line with other consumer practices. You know how when you buy something, you're generally allowed to keep it?
In the case of live service games, in the terms of service for those, you are not buying the game. You're buying a license to the game. And that's
irrelevant. A license to a game and buying a game should be the same thing.
It's the part that's really different here. If we don't like the idea of live service games as a whole, I get it. Don't play live service games then. Don't agree to those terms. But if we're under this weird idea that
if you don't like it, don't agree to the terms, there's also a problem, because that's like saying, hey, this thing you really like, you can't have it because in the legalese behind it, they've said that the developer, the CEO, Bobby Carter, can come to your house and drink the blood of your newborn infant the second you have it, right? That doesn't make the TOS valuable or useful, and it doesn't pass basic CPA. This is a good lesson for anyone. If you are under an NDA and the NDA requests something unfair of you, like let's say you sign a contract with a company and that company says that in a legal standpoint, if we do something wrong, you have to protect us in court and you have given up all rights to sue. And then all of a sudden the CEO comes along and molests you. Guess what? You can still sue. And that TOS, that NDA that you've signed becomes invalid, right? Not the other way around. The guy doesn't get to rape you and then not get sued. That's not how that works.
We need to get rid of all live service games or damage that practice in any way to keep in line with consumer policies. It is in line with consumer policies. If it wasn't, it wouldn't be there in the first place. So this doesn't really make a lot of sense to me.
That doesn't make sense as well. Law doesn't work like that. From a legalese standpoint, and having read millions of contracts at this point, that's an over-exaggeration, probably closer to hundreds. It's not in line with consumer policies. It's in line with what's most beneficial to most politicians in the modern day. Not in line with what would be most beneficial. What the fuck? What the fuck? Of course, the TOS has to work for that.
You're not buying the game, you're buying a license to the game. In
irrelevant,
the niche cases where a studio is trying to sell a game as if you are buying it or purchasing it or using that language specifically, and they give you a live service game instead, I agree that should change. That language should change. You are not purchasing the game, you are not buying the game, you are paying to have a license to a live service experience. I get that. Is that what this is doing, though?
You are paying to have a license to a live service experience. The problem is you are not utilizing this from the perspective of commercial to commercial. You are utilizing it from the perspective of commercial to public, right? To some member of the public who's not reusing it for profitable reasons. Purchasing the license to a game should quintessentially be the same as purchasing some version of a game.
Serious sloth, serious sloth,
serious sloth, serious sloth, serious sloth, serious sloth, serious sloth, serious sloth, serious sloth, serious sloth, serious sloth, serious sloth, serious sloth.
And you're going to wake up one morning and there's going to be a white substance on your forehead. And you're not going to know where it came from. He's just saying this is bad and vague. Okay, so from that perspective, what he's saying, I 100% agree that this seems vague on both ends. I disagree with what they've said here. I don't think the initiative of Stop Killing Games is bad, but I think it needs a lot of rewording. Also, Arnold Schwarzenegger doesn't seem to work.
Initiative is not trying to call that out specifically. It's trying to say that all games need to stay in a functional, playable state, which is not calling out the language that is being used to manipulate the player. Call that out specifically, not this vague bullshit.
And finally, this is a diversion from really serious topics that politicians would prefer not to deal with.
That's really gross to me as well. The idea that this is just a diversion from serious topics and they can get an easy win in and we can just push it.
So, so from both sides here, right? I think this emotional argument shit doesn't work, right? I think saying, oh, it's disgusting, oh, I disagree with, guess what? People have a million different stances on abortion. Some people will think your stance is disgusting and then other people won't, right? I don't think that the division there
look at
is valuable whatsoever.
World of Warcraft and MOBAs, all that complaining, but they never stopped funding the companies for years.
God damn it. Hold on. Basically, don't let the boomers do this, but some folks who know what the fuck is going on. That would be the best case, Rennie, but guess what? These people are fucking retarded. That's never happening. When everyone was going through the COVID pandemic, we needed to cough on a few more old people to get what we needed. Yeah, just in the right direction, and then maybe some things would have changed. That's a joke for legal purposes.
It through and there won't be a lot of pushback on it and they're not going to have to think about it too hard. That's crazy dangerous, dude. If you're going to be setting precedent, if you're going to be putting forward something that you want to start a conversation to eventually become legislation, and these are the reasons for it, not only can I not agree with the initiative, but I can't agree with you. And I think that the tactics that you're using here are really disgusting.
Wait, so here's the thing, right? Politicians like easy wins. Okay, so these are the reasons it could pass, not the reasons it should pass. Right? All of these points are valid from the perspective of they could pass the law. But from a factual standpoint, this is irrelevant. This is irrelevant. Law is already unclear on this practice. This is a relevant reason. Initiative is in line with other consumer policies. This is yet to be discovered, right? We don't know about this. But like I said before, I don't believe that a lot of the law is in line with consumer policies as much as it should be. And this last one is irrelevant. Thor saying he's emotional and this is disgusting and he won't support it, that's an emotional response, right? I don't think having this emotional response like this is setting a good precedent for how we should interact with each other when it comes to serious legal matters. And we should be sitting down like fucking adults instead of saying, you are disgusting, you did this, you fucking horrible person, blah, because that's how you get into these weird arguments about what should and shouldn't happen based on people's feelings instead of what is the most practical and useful for the consumer.
Not only can I not agree with the initiative, but I can't agree with you. And I think that the tactics that you're using here are really disgusting.
Irrelevant.
So yes, I won't agree with that, and I won't agree with Ross. There's no way around that. I think this is gross. To sum it all up, no, I will not be supporting the initiative Stop Killing Games. You're not going to change my mind on it because I find this language to be incredibly vague and damaging to the rest of our industry. I think that it will be bad for both developers and players down the line in the way that it is currently written. And I think that starting a conversation that doesn't get to the core of the issue is both wasted time and leads to potentially bad outcomes. So if we want to talk about this, let's talk about the actual bad business practices. In the case that a studio is making a live service game and they sell it to you as a product, they say that you are purchasing the game or you are buying the game, when in reality you're actually purchasing or buying a license to that game.
I gotta pull something up.
I think that we should be fighting about that.
I gotta pull something up here to make this make sense, right? And some other fuck left a comment saying, oh, you're trying to be Thor by using paint. I don't think they realize that paint has been free since 1985. But I want to make this point, right? If you have... Let's go with that. You have this Stop Killing Games initiative that's happening right now, right? I see this documentation that they've written, this petition, as a starting point, right? It starts here, right? What needs to happen is people need to argue with this revision, with this law, and then revise it, and then revise it, and then revise it, and then revise it, and then revise it again, and revise it, and revise it, and finally come to something agreeable, and get to this point where we get something reasonable that works, right? Also, I don't know who subbed or followed. I'm getting an undefined, but whoever you are, thank you very much. I appreciate it. It must have been a sub on YouTube because my multi-chat's broken, right? But this is the way I see it. This Stop Killing Games initiative is here. Thor is looking at the Stop Killing Games initiative as if it's here and it's about to be signed into law, right? I think this is the miscommunication that's happening here, right? Is this petition is not in a final state. It's not even in a good state. And there's a lot there that I would contend with from a legal and factual standpoint. But Thor is coming at this like this is going into law tomorrow, and we need to be worried about it. Now, the problem Thor has here, right, is not actually any of his statements that I see running through this video up until this point. He's got his opinions on it. I think his problem comes in just about here at 9 minutes, 30 seconds, all the way to this point here and maybe beyond. But he's getting emotional, he's calling these people disgusting, and he is attacking people who are technically speaking supposed to be on the same side as him. And he could have said, hey, this is maybe a good initiative, but aimed at the wrong thing. Why don't you guys consider this factor? Maybe I can help you with this factor. Is there anything you've thought about when it comes to this issue over here? Maybe you want to think about this. Maybe you want to put in an exception that comes along with this. Maybe we can actually harden this piece of law here and then get to something functional. But instead, what he's done is said, these people are disgusting. Fuck these guys. I hate it. I won't support it, which is a very emotional response and not very valuable or useful for most people. That's what I'm seeing being the primary issue here. Now, that seems to be the thing that sparked this big fucking chaos between Stop Killing Games and not. Right? I may be misunderstanding that, but I think that this here, responding emotionally, calling it disgusting and outright attacking people who think they're doing the right thing is not the way to handle people like that. People always think they're doing the right thing, right? That is why some people tend to be like idealistic communists or idealistic free market capitalists, is they truly believe that they are doing the right thing for people. And attacking them and saying, you are disgusting and fuck you, you sick piece of shit, that's not going to help anything. That is just going to take people, and it's going to put some people on Thor's side, and it's going to put some people against Thor on the other side, and these two people are going to go to fucking war against each other. And we're not going to get anywhere, because while we're busy fighting, all these companies, you know what, you want to know where all these companies are? You know what, you want to know the position that the companies in the background who get away with skeevy little shit like this while these two groups are fighting, you know what they're doing? They're going, yeah, fight for me, boys. Yeah, that's what Daddy Kartik likes to see. Yeah, get at each other. Yeah, call each other disgusting. And the real problem never gets fucking sorted out. Because instead of fighting each other and insulting each other, these groups could be working together to get something done. Right? But this is the issue. Here is these people are so busy fucking attacking each other in their small world, they're not seeing the bigger picture of we could work together and get something done. Right? So I don't like the fact that they are attacking each other emotionally. I think that's fucking stupid, especially when it comes to a legal issue. If you want to attack me or give me death threats about me saying that Guild Wars 2 is pay to win, that's fine, Because guess what? I have no power to change what's in the game or not. I don't have the power to change the regulation or not. Neither do you. So how am I going to get fucking mad? I'm going to think it's funny, right? Because we're two retards in a field throwing pieces of shit at each other, not having any effect on the wider industry. But now that this is a legal case and this is a legal standpoint, going at each other like this is not going to help. All of this is a time waster in my head. Calling each other disgusting and saying I won't support this and fighting against each other is fucking stupid. It is small world and it is stupid.
That needs to go away. A player should be well informed at the point of purchase that they are purchasing a license, not buying a game. And the reason that we have those licenses in the case of client-server interactions, like we had before, we're talking about client-server games, is so that they can ban you when you cheat at them. They revoke your license. That's why they revoke your license, to protect the gameplay of every other player that you're impacting when you cheat at these.
Yeah, but that's reasonable within the TOS because you can get that with heavy machineries. Misuse of heavy machinery means that they can, you waive your right to sue, you waive your operation of certain machinery because you're not in the correct state or you misuse it, right? If you misuse it and die or lose a leg, guess what? That's your fault, right? It should be the same case with misuse when it comes to cheating, right? It can be taken away from you. You drive drunk long enough, guess what? You get caught, they're going to take away your license eventually, and no car driving for you.
Games. That needs to exist, but it needs to be better informed to the player at time of purchase. So I agree on that. This doesn't bring that up, though. It just attacks all video games that have online-only components. And
does anyone here know if Accursed Farmed insulted Thor or anything? I don't actually know. I know nothing about Accursed Farmed. I still think that this emotional attack is a very poor idea. Right? He's in his right to do it, freedom of speech. I think he's purely within his right to do it. I just don't think it's a very smart thing when you could be aiming at the real problem instead of aiming at each other. Instead, Thor could have gone out of his way to help these people reform this into something far more functional.
And says that they need to keep being able to be played indefinitely. That doesn't make any sense to me. Aside from that, a lot of people really like live service games as they exist now. So trying to kill off all live service games is something.
They like the function of live service games as they exist, and the second they go offline, well then fuck you.
You know, Roze, initially when you said
is.
GW2 is P2W, I was kind of mad and peeved. I calmed down, listened to your point, and agreed.
Well, that's the thing, right? That's called being rational about it, right? You don't even have to agree with me for us to have a rational conversation about whether something is or isn't pay to win. You can walk away completely disagreeing with me and still be rational about it, and that's perfectly fine.
Some people have said online, it doesn't make any sense either. Live service games are a great way to get away from the real world. They're about social interaction between players.
Also, Frazzles, I wasn't an NFT bro. I'm someone who actually works in crypto. It's my job, and not the sit in my basement kind, right? I'm actually a guy who looked into this, audited the code, looked at the definition, and yes, I thought all the art shit was goddamn retarded. I thought all of it deserved to die, and anyone losing money deserved to lose money in those things, right? But I saw that there's a functional use that NFTs can serve in the future, especially against something like AI, right? As a verification system, a digital verification system. All of that's gone out the fucking window because guess what? We've got better digital verification systems that don't require you to fucking purchase penis coin that you're going to hold in your wallet for the next 5 years. But then it's going to have some value, bro, right? So I wasn't an NFT bro. I never wanted to push the idea, but I saw that there may have been some future functional use for NFTs and that it was a budding technology that's going to be going through the scam phase, as all technologies do.
Some people get married in them. Some people met their spouse in them and then got married in them. It's a really cool thing for a point in time in which you're having that social experience. And to destroy that just because you don't like them is very weird. I don't think that makes a lot of sense to me. I also don't think it makes sense the way that Roze is posing this is why it's going to pass. I think that's incredibly inflammatory and could lead to a lot of damage to both what he's trying to stop and to games as a whole.
I agree that what his list here of why it should pass is inflammatory and it damages his point more than it helps. Because like I said, first point is irrelevant. Second point is irrelevant to the law. Third one is valuable, and the fourth one is irrelevant as well.
To say that the government just doesn't care and this is an easy win and we're going to get it through is disingenuous. You're talking about a multi-billion-dollar global industry. To think that the government isn't going to be meticulously looking through this and looking for flaws and holes is absurd. So I don't think...
Okay, I think Thor's wrong there. He doesn't know how much bullshit passes without people looking at it.
think that's honest at all, and I find it disgusting. So for everyone who's mad about that, fine. Be angry about it. I'm not going to change my stance on that because I can't agree with this, both as a dev and a player. I see the danger involved, I see the vagueness in the language, and it doesn't make sense to me. If we want to fight for better conditions for players, then fight the actual problem. Don't make new ones.
Okay, so I'm not mad at him for this. I'm not mad at Thor for his opinion on this. But I do think he made a very stupid mistake by being hyper-emotional about it. Right? I think he's attacking people who are trying to do something good, but in the wrong way. And he could have helped them do it better, but he didn't. He instead attacked them emotionally. That's the most egregious part of this video that I can say. I understand that he's compromised because he's more of a dev side of things instead of a consumer side of things. And generally, consumers should be your priority. But I think we've got two types of ants in a jar, and someone's shaking the fucking jar, and the ants are killing each other and not looking at the person shaking the jar.